Hello, everyone. I am Ivy the Occultist, and today I am joined by Marshall, the Witch of Southern Light. And I'm so excited because we already did a collaboration together, and everyone loves Marshall. There were so many comments on our previous collaboration saying how much people loved you. And I'm really excited to hear your wisdom today. So, we're going to be talking about folkloric traditional witchcraft, and then we're also going to talk about his book, Cunning Words, which I am super excited to talk about because I just finished it and I'm obsessed. I love it. So, Marshall, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and then also tell people kind of where they can find you?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Marshall, the Witch of Southern Light. I am a Texas-based folkloric and traditional witch. Um, let's see, I've been practicing on and off for multiple years now. Started in my early teens, had a little bit of a break in my 20s, got back into spirituality, specifically witchcraft, even more so in my 30s. And it's been quite a whirlwind. It's very interesting, especially seeing the history of the way that throughout time and throughout my own childhood, teenage years, witchcraft, Wicca, traditional witchcraft, folklore has all of this has changed and evolved. It's super wonderful. So if you want to find me, I am on TikTok and Instagram and Threads as Witch of Southern Light. I am sometimes now less so on Twitter, Marshall WSL. There's a link tree in all of my bios if you want to get more information on where you can find my witchy wares as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to have all of his links below in the description box. So if you didn't get all that, that's fine. Check the description box. You're good. So let's dive right into folkloric traditional witchcraft because that's kind of your niche. And I'm
Yeah.
excited to talk about it because I feel like eclectic witchcraft has kind of taken the main stage for the witchcraft community for at least the
Mhm.
past couple years. And a lot of people either don't know that traditional witchcraft exists and that it's an actual thing, or they
Mhm.
know it exists, but they don't really understand what it is. So I guess just to kind of like let's establish our basis here. In your own words, how would you define traditional witchcraft?
And to be perfectly honest, I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. A lot of people have a hard time defining it in general. They have easy time to define it for themselves, but it is harder to define in general because it's kind of a web, if you will, of things that have coalesced and accumulated from multiple sources over time. But to kind of give you the most general sense of what traditional witchcraft is, um, it's a little bit more. It is less, I want to say it's less religious. It's less ceremonial, more based off of the folk, more based off of the landscape, more based off of spirit work, spirit primers. It's based off of folklore. It's based off of witch trial confessions. It is accumulative and comes from different types of folk traditions that have been passed down throughout the ages. So sometimes, over in the UK, I've heard people describe it, especially as they've written about it, describe it as old craft. I've heard people describe it as capital T, traditional craft, trad craft, traditional witchcraft. Sometimes they call it just work. There's a lot of different names that have gone into building this, and a lot of it kind of started, interestingly enough, this very specific terminology started around the same time, funny enough, as Wicca did. There was a original kind of well-known founder of kind of like that first sect of capital T tradition, meaning he created a type of tradition. His name was Robert Cochrane, and he created the Clan of Tubal Cain, which was the first kind of well-known uh, covens or covens of traditional witchcraft. And he created a very specific belief system because, as all wonderful things come from a clash of ideas, he vehemently disagreed with many aspects about what witchcraft was with Gerald Gardner. They knew each other. They did not like each other. They had a lot of disagreements. And so they obviously had some ideas of similarities, but they really broke off and went in two different directions. And then so around this time period, you have Wicca growing with different ideas around over this area, and you have traditional witchcraft growing with different ideas around this area. And there, over time, have been some crossovers. And as time went on, many of these, there are some actual like closed traditional covens. We call that capital T because it is a very specific tradition that is passed down through a type of coven-based lineage. And then there's lowercase traditional craft. That's where I come in. Mine is more so based on my landscape. I think about the literal spirits of my house, of the crossroads outside of my street, of the block that I live on, of the city that I live in, of the state that I live in, of the country that I live in, and the way in which spirit comes and coalesces around me on the place in the planet that on the planet that I live in. So um for me, it comes down to inspirations, folklore, stories that have been passed down through time, that have been assigned to herbs, that have been assigned to crossroads, that have been ascribed to different types of tree lore or plant lore, or mythology. I love mythology.
Me
I
too.
think I do. I do. I love Celtic mythology. I love Greek mythology or Hellenistic mythology. I love Norse mythology. I like the Brothers Grimm. I love folklore. I love stories. And for me, that's where the folklore aspect comes in into being a folkloric witch. Um, there is a lot of folklore, but for me personally, I was born in Texas. Um, so while I want to connect to my land, a lot of the traditional long time folklore that is based off of the very earth beneath my feet is not mine to access. It's Native
Yeah.
American, it's indigenous folklore, it's Kickapoo, it's Cherokee. Like there is a lot of ancestry that lived here before mine came, and I feel like we don't talk about this living in the United States quite as much, because many of the traditions of witchcraft that make their way over here come from Europe, come from the UK, come from other areas that then we have to lean back and tap into. And at the same time, I don't live in the UK. I don't live in Europe. I don't live in Spain. I don't live in Italy. So
Yep.
I'm not immersed in that culture. So while I can look into folklore, while I can glean these stories and kind of take from them and work with them and apply them to a type of practice, I'm not immersed in the culture. So sometimes many of these stories don't mean the same thing that, say, a Welsh folktale might mean to Mara Starling. It wouldn't mean the same thing that an Italian folktale might mean to someone living in Sicily, living in Palermo. Like it won't mean the same thing to me. So that's actually one of the reasons why I wrote my book. I wanted to build a type of narrative folklore that I could put my practice in and extract my practice from, kind of in a type of a cycle. I wanted to create new stories that were inspired by old ideas, old themes, and archetypes. Um, and I wanted to kind of build some of my own folklore. I also really wanted people to know that you, as a practitioner, can do this too. There is no, to be perfectly honest, there is no new trope. These stories, these archetypes that inform our humanity have been around for civilization, from civilization to civilization. Um, I think we absolutely can tap into these pathways of magic, these themes, and build stories that inform our practice, our craft, that inspire us. As an animist, because that's a huge part of what it means to be a traditional and folkloric witch, I see spirit in everything. That means the characters in my book are spirits that I can work with because they exist.
Yes.
And in general, that's my conception. I know I told you it's a big web, but that's my conception of traditional and folkloric witchcraft.
Oh gosh, you said that so beautifully. And I love that you brought up the fact. I think a lot of people, when they think traditional witchcraft, they think
Hmm.
it's some form of witchcraft that existed thousands and thousands of years ago. But
Hmm.
really, it's like this, from my understanding, it's like this tree where the witchcraft is the tree, and you have one branch that went to Wicca and one went to traditional witchcraft. And traditional witchcraft is not as old as people
Hmm.
think it is. But I love
Yeah.
that.
And the ideas are based off of things that are old,
Oh, sure.
but the actual like, you know, lineage, like no,
Yes.
it is not some ancient thing. It is inspired by ancient things,
Yes.
just as much as Wicca is inspired by ancient things. And I
Hmm.
think that's where we really need to understand. It's interesting. I want to say sometime last year on Twitter, I did a poll. I love doing Twitter polls, because they really but they don't really confirm or deny what might be a belief I already have, but more so they inform us as a community what a communal belief might actually be. I'm always surprised by some of the responses I get. And I asked, when you see or hear the terms traditional witchcraft, what do you think? Do you have a negative or positive reaction? And it was alarmingly negative, actually. People had a lot of different comments saying people who call themselves trad crafters or traditional witchcraft, I think elitism. I think people who think that they're higher than other, people who believe in an ancient magic that isn't actually ancient. It was very interesting. It was quite a somewhat of a visceral reaction. And I think that really kind of comes down to a misrepresentation with the idea of what traditional means. Because I think you kind of pointed that out, didn't
Yep.
you?
Oh yeah.
Traditional doesn't mean it's been around for ages, ages and ages. Traditional just means it's a tradition. I
Yep.
mean, I wake up every morning and have coffee. That is a tradition. Every
Yes.
year at Christmas time, my mom makes the savory party mix crackers. It's a tradition. We make new traditions every day, and part of the term of traditional witchcraft just meant that it carries forth a mindset of tradition, old
Yes.
ideas that are being passed down, sometimes being evolved, sometimes changing. And the way in which a traditional witch living in, say, Cornwall, again, one of my biggest inspirations, Jim McGarry, who wrote Traditional Witchcraft, a book of Cornish ways, is going to be very different from a traditional witch like myself living in Texas. It's a different climate, different animals, different landscape, different folklore and history. I'm going to get more into the history of my city, maybe the history of certain buildings that have been around for several hundred years. Well, maybe just a couple hundred years max. That's it. Maybe I'll get into the spirits of rivers, maybe the spirits of creeks, the spirits of, I live in an inner city, so we have like a major walkway trail that goes throughout the whole thing that has a spirit. That might be more of my folklore. That might be where I am drawing magic from. I live at a crossroads with at least a 150-year-old oak. I really, really lean into the space in which I reside, the spirits of that crossroads, of that oak, of the acorns that come from it, of the bamboo across the way, of the I have a lot of trees in my area, so you'll notice I really lean into a lot of tree spirits because I feel that they really kind of surround me where I live.
Yeah. I am so jealous of your oak tree, by the way. Oh my gosh, how
It's so
magical.
huge. It's
I
so
bet.
big. And it's crazy. Every time I go to take a picture of it, it's like I can't capture the immenseness. And when I try, I'm like, well, crap, there's my little crossroads stop sign in the back. So it gives away where I live and I never post it.
Oh,
So
it's meant
ultimately,
it's
it's
meant to
meant
be
to
just
be.
for you. Yeah,
It's
it's meant
just
to
for
be your
me.
secret little cove. So
It's like that meme that's like, I love the way the moon absolutely refuses to be caught beautifully on an iPhone camera.
yes, it's so true. It's meant to be in the moment with just you, and that's it.
Yes,
Not meant to be
that's it.
shared with the masses. I understand. I love that you touched on this was something I wasn't planning on talking about today, but I love
Please.
that you talked on being an American living in the United States and
Mhm.
looking into the folklore of our different regions. I ran into the same issue where I really wanted to start working with some of the land spirits that have been around here for a long time. I was trying to look up the folklore of my region. Everything led me back to Native American roots, and I'm
Mhm.
obviously not Native American. So it is a struggle living in the
Mhm.
United States because you're detached. I mean, I am very UK and Scandinavian. Like that is my, I guess, my genealogical heritage. And it's frustrating because I would love to go there. I would love to work with those spirits, but I'm not there. So how do you even work with spirits here? There's a little bit of a disconnect, and I suppose you still could, but yeah, so I really loved the characters in your book. I love that you are creating characters for yourself. And there's a whole rant I want to go in later when we talk about your book and whatnot, because it goes on a whole chaos magic route. So we'll get to all that. But I guess,
And that's so true that I do. I will get to it, of course, but I want
yeah,
to like absolutely say there is a large amount of completely unspoken chaos magic that exists in this book.
yes, I
It's
was
completely
noticing.
unspoken about. We'll get into it because I think that's a really cool thing you tapped into, and I'm really
Yeah.
glad you did. You're the first one to
Oh,
bring it up, so I'm
Oh,
excited.
I when I was reading your book, I was like, this is all chaos magic. This is great. I mean,
Mhm.
obviously there's some folkloric traditional witchcraft too, but yeah, we'll talk about that. So okay, let's make it a little bit more personal then, if you're okay with
Yeah,
that. With
please.
traditional witchcraft, how do you define yourself as a traditional witch? Like what
Mhm.
are some things that you do that you say, oh, this is totally folkloric traditional witchcraft?
Um, I see a story in everything. I see spirit in everything. Now that's animism in general. Animism in general is part of folklore of traditional witchcraft. Now not everyone who's an animist is a traditional witch though, so it's one of those things. So part of one of the things that I absolutely see in traditional witchcraft is let's go ahead and get this one out of the way. It is probably the most obvious, and it's the most roadblocks for people who feel like, wait, what? There's the folkloric devil. Let's go ahead and just
Oh,
get that out of the way immediately. I grew up with Wicca. I grew up with Silver Ravenwolf, with
yep.
Scott Cunningham and Buckland, and I grew up with There's no devil in the craft. There's no devil in witchcraft. That's a Christian concept. There's no devil in the craft. There is no devil in the craft. I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen it on TikTok. I've seen it still to this day by some people who are reading this material. And absolutely, I understand your perspective. There is no devil in your craft. But one of the things that really separates traditional witchcraft is the inclusion of the folkloric devil. Now, let me explain. The folkloric devil is not exactly the same thing as what you see in the Bible. It's not exactly the same thing as what you see in any Abrahamic belief whatsoever. The folkloric devil might be a stag in the woods, a he-goat, a horned creature of the crossroads, a man in black. They come, when I say they, I mean they, because these forms have come in folklore, in stories, in confessions, in many forms. And when they do, I promise you, I've never seen the devil or Satan come in any of these forms in the Bible, in Christianity, in Judaism, because when it comes down to it, we have to understand this gets into a larger web, but the folkloric devil is an inspiration, a trickster spirit, a liminal being that resides as a type of initiator, a gatekeeper, one in which comes to you and offers you, especially as an ostracized or marginalized person in folklore and in confessions, offers you a sense of sovereignty, of personal power, a way out of a tough situation is what we get in a lot of these stories. And sometimes, they're a little tricky, and sometimes they're your savior. Sometimes they will turn on you. Sometimes they will offer you power. They've come in so many different types of stories, and how you end up interacting with this figure, this folkloric devil, this man in black, this horned being. Um, it's not the same thing as the Christian Satan. That's the most important thing you need to know. It's a spirit of place, and sometimes gets called genius loci, which literally means spirit of place. Some people might disagree with that. That's not the same thing. I think that these names can be perceived and somewhat interchangeable. And if you've ever read, again, I'm going to bring up Gemma Gary because she's a great example. If you ever read her book Traditional Witchcraft, her coven entitles this character the Bucka Guida and Bucka Do, because they're the representative of the spirit, the devil of her land, and represents the light and dark aspects, and which one you might call to work with whatever you're working with. In Keldon's Traditional Witchcraft, or sorry, a Crooked Path, he mentions the Witch King and Witch Queen, the Witch Father, Witch Mother. Again, more interchangeable names. They are archetypal spirits that represent something so much larger, this great initiator. And so when it comes down to traditional witchcraft, one of the largest, biggest, and most blaring things that you will see is the inclusion of this folkloric devil.
Yeah. Yep. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you touched on that because it's very different than the Christian devil. And
It is.
yeah, the
It is.
witch's
It's
devil
yeah,
is,
it's not like this adversary to God. And just to throw a little info out for people who may not know this, um, the term the term devil wasn't even actually part of the Bible until way, way later due to translations. The word Satan actually comes from a Hebrew word which means adversary. It's not even a person. It's not even a fallen angel. The original snake in the Garden of Good and Evil, which was actually a Jewish story, not a Christian story originally, wasn't even considered to be the devil, not the fallen angel Lucifer. It was just a story, a parable telling about an adversary to the will of God. So when we talk about the folkloric devil, we're not talking about the Christian God's adversary. We're talking about a spirit of place. We're talking about a liminal being, an initiator into this form of witchcraft.
yes. I'm so glad you said that too, because that is something that I wanted to say, but I was like, I'm not going to go down that road. But I'm glad
I'll
you
do it. I'll
said
do it
it.
quickly.
Thank you. Yes, that idea was absolutely stolen. So thank you for clearing that up a little bit. So why folkloric traditional witchcraft for you? Like
Mhm.
what if somebody were interested in this path, what sort of books inspired you? Why did you feel like your soul fit here?
You know, there is an aspect of traditional witchcraft that is very non-religious. It's a little bit more, I hate to say it's spiritual, not religious, because that sounds so cliche, but it is. It is a spiritual practice. It's a working with spirits. Um, I may even sometimes use the term horned god or goddess, but I don't necessarily consider these to be like worshipped, deified beings. I mean, it depends on how you want to kind of think about it. You could go a more secular route, you could go a more religious route. I just don't personally have a religious route. I go for a more honorific, a working with, a working relationship with. We make contracts, we make agreements. I offer a little bit, you offer a little bit back. I like contractual work. I don't like, and maybe it comes from my own personal trauma in the church. I don't like the idea of subjugation. I don't like the idea of worship. Um, that's just my personal preference. Uh, I feel much closer to the concept of spirits than I do with the concept of gods. And that's just kind of where I find myself really finding my niche. Um, yeah, I think that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think we're going to end up going into books that inspired you later on as well,
Yes,
because we're going to,
sure.
when we talk about your book, there's a lot of stuff there too that we could get into. So what sort of regional or like ancestral folklore has been impactful for you? I mean, are there, there's like Celtic, there's Appalachian. So is
Mhm.
there any particular folklore that has really been inspiring for you?
When it comes down to it, a lot of the folklore that really, really inspires me, comes from a couple different places. A lot of it does come from Europe, specifically the UK. A lot of these practices came from there. Uh, you get like the abracadabra triangle. You get this actually, the abracadabra triangle and the satyr square didn't even come from the UK. What am I talking about? They're things that travel to the UK with time. But a lot of the cunning folk traditions, a lot of these traditions that ultimately ended up making their way into uh, wise women, cunning folk, witch doctors, and I mean people who actually like doctored witchcraft. A lot of these things were written down in commonplace books. They're written down in little personal grimoires and texts. The way in which European grimoires that are centuries old were then adapted by cunning folk, you know what? I may not have the full literacy to read all of this, but I understand that this picture means this thing. So I'm going to use this picture in a charm. And then I'm going to put that in my little book. And then this little book is the book that ends up getting, spread from one person down to the next person or the next person as they share their craft with their apprentices or whatnot.
Mm.
Um, I was very inspired by that. And to today, I still kind of do that with old grimoires. I create new ones inspired by them myself. So when it comes to stories, very specific stories, I actually don't have a lot of familial ancestral stories because both of my parents were actually born on the opposite side of the world. They're both American. They're both kids of military, but they were born on the opposite side of the world, and they had very different life experiences. My dad's family grew up in Singapore, so a lot of their exposure was to stories that were from the other side of the world. And some of the things I remember them telling me in childhood, uh, they weren't anything that more so gave me the same sort of mythology that I apply directly to this practice. I more so apply mythology created around witches from confessions. I'm not sure if you've ever read Emma Wilby's Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits, or if you've read uh, uh, there's a really great book by Ash Williams called Isabel Gowdy's Black Book, and it lists specifically the transcripts from her confessions. And it's really, really interesting because you can see the types of things that she admits that she did while supposedly under absolutely no duress or torture. Supposedly she
Wow.
confessed to these wild nights of copulating with the devil and with his ICC. Like she literally said these things like um she talked about elf arrows that were given to her by spirits that her and her coven would fly overnight and shoot down people. And like there were a lot of some really,
Wow.
really like visceral things. But she also talked about the fact that she would say an incantation to the devil to turn herself into a hare. And then when she wanted to turn back into human form, she'd say a prayer to God because, again, there were these ideas around this time period that the devil would distort God's form and only God could revert it. And it's really, really interesting how many of these bits of folklore really, really touch on or are affected by Christianity.
Mhm.
That was the belief. That was the pervasive belief at the time. So this is where you get some of these concepts where the folkloric devil came to me in the woods. The folkloric devil came to me at the crossroads. I met a man dressed in black in the cemetery, and he offered me this. We get these types of scenarios because many of these people that were arrested during the Inquisitions across Europe, across the UK, even in America. Many of them were desperate. They were ostracized. They were marginalized people. I can guarantee you at least 50% of them, at least 50% of them, would not in any way, shape, or form have identified as a witch, as a cunning person, as a midwife, as a healer. They wouldn't have. They would have just been accused. Now, many of them were herbalists, many of them were midwives, many of them were people who were, again, queer or might have dabbled in certain types of folk magic at the time. It's interesting. We actually have a whole history of folk magic that was extremely acceptable because it was Christian, and only due to these advancing inquisitions, as these advancing witch hunts, did slowly more and more people start to distrust the folks who, for their entire lives, have done a healing prayer for them to remove warts or to take your donkey's thrush away. And all of a sudden, now you're wondering what else are they doing when I'm not looking? And
Right.
that's the way in which these things turned. So a huge amount of folk magic that existed long before that got kind of twisted and become part of these confessions. All of these things have contributed to stories and folklore about, quote, what witches do, end quote.
Mm.
So like they inspire what we do now, what traditional witches and folkloric witches end up building their practice around now.
Yeah. Can you just brought up so many things for me. Can you go back to the word cunning? Because your book is
Mm-hmm.
called Cunning Words, and
Yes.
we're almost to that point where I want to start asking you a couple questions. Where does that word, because I know of cunning folk and whatnot. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know the where that word originates from. Do you? Do you have any history on the word? It's okay if you don't. I was just
That's a really good
curious.
question.
Yeah.
Its original inception. I don't know its original inception. I do know that the term cunning folk was for people who don't know was used to describe like the local fairy doctors, the local people who might know a little bit of folk magic or who might be able to. They may only be able to do one thing. Maybe it's just remove warts. Maybe it's they were a dowser. They would find water. Maybe they were able to say a specific psalm or prayer over a burn. Maybe they were able to you know, take this is the really, really most popular one. They were able to remove bad witchcraft and hexes sent your way. That was the biggest one. So a
Right.
cunning person usually had no qualms with the community. In fact, a lot of times they were a regular part of the community. They offered a specific service. But the idea was is that they were it's interesting when you look up the word cunning, it doesn't actually say, clever, ingenuitous. It says, slightly it has a hint of a hint more sinister vibe. But the way in which it was used in this was the idea that they had a it's hard, I don't want to use the actual word in the definition itself. They had a cunning eye. They had a sense of cleverness. And the idea was is you might be able to kind of like I'm paraphrasing here. If you have the ability to kind of work both sides,
Mm.
to rock a little bit of a crooked path, yes, you're on the path of God, absolutely. But you know what? When no one's looking, sometimes I dabble a little bit over here. I'm a little bit cunning like that. You may not
Sure.
always see it, but I'm clever enough to make it the next day, even after dabbling over here. Because a lot of times, these witch doctors, these cunning folk, if you had a disease, if you had an illness, they wouldn't pray to God to take it away because the disease was evil, the illness was bad. Only something bad could get rid of or abolish something bad. So you might actually pray to the devil to take this. Now, again, these are things you don't talk about, you don't hear about quite as much because we keep this on the down low. We keep this to ourselves. And these are types of things that we've seen in documentation throughout time, where again, it goes back to that little confession from Isabel Gowdy. You work with the devil to distort God's form. You work with God to bring it back to its original design, so to speak. And it's kind of funny. Here I am immersing the way in which much of witchcraft is actually a response to Christianity. And I don't feel like that's also talked about very much. I think that a lot of people who talk about witchcraft like it's this thing that predated Christianity, but a lot of modern witchcraft is actually a response to the way that Christianity spread throughout Europe, spread through the UK, spread into America. I mean, that's how we get so many different types of practices. Appalachian, granny magic. We have a Brachai over in Pennsylvania and Dutch Pennsylvania. These are all Christian-based folk magic,
Yes.
and they have pervasively made their way into modern witchcraft as well. Now, folk magic and witchcraft are not the same, but can a witch also do folk magic? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so can you go back to way back when we talked about spirits with folkloric
Mhm.
traditional witchcraft? There is like this
Yes.
animist component. You're working with spirits a lot, and you mentioned that you potentially work with spirits in your house. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about the spirits that you specifically work with, if they're okay with you sharing that information, of course?
Yes, absolutely. I think we should all be more attentive to the spirits of our house. And I think we see this in the most mundane ways. Have you ever felt stifled in your home when you're like, I just need to clean up. I need to wash these floors. I need to do the dishes. I need to do the laundry. I feel stuck. And what's crazy is after you do all those things, you feel motivated. You have a clear space. Things are flowing through. I
Mhm.
think that is a perfect and extremely reasonable response to the way the spirit of your house is grateful that you straightened up a little bit.
Yeah.
I light a candle every day. I have this vanilla crackling candle that I love. It's by Woodwick. It's an offering. I know what types of scent my the spirit of my house wants. It likes warm scents. It likes spicy scents, kitchen scents, vanilla, patchouli, chai. I don't know how I know that. I just know that. And so I will light a candle and thanks or an offering to my house spirits. When things are going awry, I need to be a little bit more attentive to my house spirits. I feel comfortable within my home because I have a good relationship with my
Mhm.
house spirits. Does that answer the question?
It totally answers the question.
Okay.
It's funny you said that because that's the exact same situation as me and my house spirit. I know that it likes warm vanilla
Mhm.
chai. I'm always burning stuff like that. Patchouli,
Oh yeah.
definitely. It's so funny. The more you build that relationship with your house spirit, the more you really identify what it likes and what it doesn't
Mhm.
like. And you're so right about cleaning up a space, and then the energy feels good and you're motivated. And yeah, so I resonate with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into your book now because
Let's do it.
oh, I'm so obsessed with it. I am really, really picky with my books because I feel like I have done this rant so many times on my channel, so I'm not really going to go into the rant, but I feel like a lot of it is watered down. A lot of it is not that there's anything wrong with New Age, but I just miss the old dirty witchcraft, if that makes sense. And I feel like reading your book was like, it was just old school witchcraft. It was so raw and vulnerable. And I loved it. I just ate it up in like less than a week. It was so great. So I'm definitely going to go back and read through it again. But I wanted to ask you a couple questions on it because you had mentioned that your book is strategically structured because you've got some short stories in there, and then you have some poems, and then you've got some spells, you've got some sigils, you have a ton of stuff. But without kind of giving too much away of what's in your book,
Mhm.
why did you have it strategically structured to where you had to read it from front to back? What was your reasoning for that?
I think that's a great question, and I say so for your listening. Introductions are important, y'all. You got to read the introductions, and I do say so in the book. It is instrumental that you read this book from page one to the final page,
Mhm.
because information is being delivered to you in a way that is meant to peel it back in layers like an onion. Um, I think a lot of times, especially as magical practitioners, we get very excited. We want to flip through the books, flip through if you want to. That's totally okay. Um, but the most important part is that you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, the spirits that you're calling up, who they are, what are their stories, what are their backgrounds, where they come from, why are you calling them, why do they matter here?
Mm.
And so I wrote this book. It's in three parts for if you haven't checked it out, anyone watching. The first part is 13 stories, and these stories have different characters. Some of them have names, some of them have no names at all. They are spirits. They are teaching you magic in the narrative form, and they might share with you operations that are actually like operational things you could literally do by picking out the story, or inspire you based off of the actions they are going through to
Mhm.
build a type of craft out of it yourself.
Mhm.
The part two is poems. I'm really, really big on poetry. I love flowery language. I love the way words flow off the tongue. I think that's something that's really fascinating, and I've always loved this idea of an old style grimoire where everything rhymes and everything just flows off, and it's gorgeous. And so there are 13 poems that teach recipes. They teach ideas. They teach sometimes spirits to work with, sometimes full on like ballad style spells. And then of course the final part is actual practical grimoire work. It's a compendium of all the magic gathered, how to apply it, where it comes from and why. And the reason I say all this is because when you get to the spells in the back, if you're doing a spell of say the 36 knots of the Red Mother to heal someone,
Mm.
how are you going to call upon the spirit of the Red Mother if you don't know her story? How are
Yes.
you, yeah, how are you going to invoke or evoke that power? Take it into yourself and put it into this thread. Ask the spirit to do something for you if you have not put in the time to understand who she is. Where'd she come from? What does she represent? And so when you read these stories, they unfold, like, as I said, like an onion. So you see the layers of a lot of these spirits, these people, these concepts, these archetypes. They teach you magic, and they teach you and give you access to calling upon them and working with them in your craft. There's one
Mhm.
story I love called The Seven Holy Siblings. And this story literally taps into the symbols and work of Agrippa and the three books of occult philosophy. And it teaches you it teaches you planetary magic by personifying the days of the week. And if you can understand this is, the sentinel of the temple of the sun. His name is Sunday. He represents bodily healing. His favorite flower is blah 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 blah. You know, if you can understand for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, if you can personify them and think about them as spirits that you're working with, it completely changes the way you think about working with planetary magic. I think a lot of people think about it as very mathematic, very operational.
Right.
And again, I think of it as spirit work. And I wanted to put that into the book so that the reader could also kind of glean that and take it into their practice. Um, but if you haven't read the book, when you get to the back section, when it talks about the grimoire of working with and making planetary talismans, how are you going to make them if you don't know their stories?
Exactly. Yeah, I really loved your characters for so many different reasons because you have so many different characters that kind of float in and out of different stories. Like you'll see a
Hmm.
little glimmer of one character from a story that happened 2 stories ago in another story. It's just really cool. There's a bunch of little Easter eggs. You can use all the characters in your rituals and your spell work. And that to
Hmm.
me, that just totally appealed to my chaos magician heart because I was like, oh, these are so juicy. I cannot wait to use these characters in my rituals. So I know that you were inspired by Agrippa. There's some planetary magic in there. I know that you read Lieber and Psychonaut, so I know there's
Hmm.
like a little bit of that influence
Oh
maybe.
yeah.
But yeah, I and your sigils. Oh my gosh, the sigils that you put in there, especially with the little figures. I don't even know what you call them, but the figures that happen after every chapter. It was I don't
Oh
know if you
yes.
can show it really
I
quick.
call them like these guys.
Yes, those, oh my gosh, I loved that imagery. That little
Hmm.
friend that just like follows you throughout the whole book. I loved
And
it.
and and there's not a single page that's the same. They all relate back in some way, shape, or
Hmm.
form, either to the story or
Hmm.
more so
Yeah.
or more so flowing throughout the book. And the whole point is to understand that the spirits are all around. The spirits are everywhere. Everything is spirited. This book has a spirit. This individual book has a spirit, and the collection is a collective spirit. And I think, and that's really hard for a lot of people to really comprehend. And to be perfectly honest, spirituality should not always be easy for us to comprehend, nor should it always be comprehensible, just known.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. Would you talk about your inspiration for, without again giving too much away,
Mhm.
would you talk about your inspiration for the black, red, and the green characters? And I'm just going to say
Yes.
characters because I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, yeah. So there are three stories in the first part of my book called Our Mother in Red, Our Mother in Green, and Our Mother in Black. And these are inspired by Gemma Gary's book, The Black Toad. I'm not sure if you've read it or not, but
Long
if
time ago.
I
Yeah.
know it's a beautiful book. I don't think I have it close. Oh, I do. I have it close by. Here it is. Um, the structure of this book was put together in a way that talks about witchcraft in the West Country. It's absolutely gorgeous. Here's the cover, if you in the hardcover. I even have a little symbol here because I absolutely love it. It's
Oh,
so stunning. You can get this book and Gemma's jewelry on troybooks.com.uk, I think, just Troy Books on their
okay.
website. But little plug, I don't make anything from it, I promise. Um, but this book was extremely inspirational for me. It's a type of grimoire, and it gets into the local folk magic of the people of the West Country in England. So that's like Devon and Cornwall area. But most importantly, there's three major sections that are broken down within the book: Old Mother Redcap, Old Mother Greencap, and Old Mother Blackcap. And the first one is a it's almost like an organizational tool. The first one is a collection of charms and spells. The second one is a collection of herbal magic, working with trees, plants, the earth, and specifically even more so curatives and healing. And the last one, Old Mother Blackcap, is all about hexing, cursing, binding. Or she puts it, which I love, owl blinking, which I think is just a
Love
lovely
it.
way to love it, blasting.
Yes.
Um, Old Mother Redcap was actually an old term used in England specifically to describe a local Pellar, a charmer. Um, it's believed that it may have originated with Old Mother Shipton, but it may have been around before her. I can't be sure. But it has been used consistently for several centuries to describe your local charmer. And it came from this idea that they would stand out because they would wear a red cloak, a red head covering, a red cape of some kind. And then from there, I believe several other what's it called? Practitioners throughout time have attributed, well, if there's an Old Mother Red Cap, there's an Old Mother Green Cap. And then Gemma herself finally designated the Old Mother Black Cap.
Mm.
So there's these three characters that are really, as I said, an organizational tool for this book to teach different types of magic. When I read this, and I read it over and over and over again, I know these drawings, I know these I felt like I knew these people. I knew who they were, and I wanted to put it on paper. I wanted to give them a story. I wanted to give them a background. And as I was writing, it was a very trance-like experience. I saw Old Mother Redcap or Our Mother in Red as this kind of like this witchy godmother who I always wish I had growing up. I'm very big in sigils, and so I very, very connect to this figure of the charmer, the Pellar, the local healer or cursor. You never know, depending on what she's twisting at the moment. Um, and then Old Mother Greencap, she's a healer. Um, I wrote her story as Vivian, the mother in green,
Mhm.
and she is an actual mother, and she makes a great sacrifice. And doing so, she really, really dives into the magic of the earth, magic of herbs, the magic of healing. In fact, her green cloak is only green because of her emptied garden being boiled down to create and hide her in the woods.
Mhm.
Again, don't want to give too much away, but
It's good.
it is. I think it's good, and I feel like she spoke to me. She gave me the story, and so Old Mother Blackcap was very similar. And you see her kind of pop around, and maybe more than one story, and coming across in my book as Our Mother in Black, there was something I. It's interesting because while she is I want to give anything away. While she is not a mother, she definitely becomes a mother figure, and I think a mother figure, you don't have to be a mother to be someone who cares about someone else who is more vulnerable than them.
Right.
I am a man, but I absolutely think of myself as a mother figure to my pups because they're more vulnerable than I am, and I love them and I want to care for them. And I think that we as practitioners can be mothers and fathers of all those who may not have the same advantage that we do. And so I wrote these characters because while many of them may have their own personal disadvantages, they have magic. They have
Yes.
access to the spirit world, and they use their advantage to care for those who can't always care for themselves, who need their help. And that's what these stories really teach.
Yeah. I mean, you already answered my next question because I was going to ask you more about the characters and how you personally use them in your practice, but it kind of sounds like they have inspired all aspects of your practice. So,
Oh yes.
yeah.
I've done two spells working with, I know I've done more than two spells. I've done two spells recently working with the Red Mother, specifically on
Oh,
um myself and my dog, and then also on another thing that I won't say here because it was a little bit more nefarious. But and all three have come to fruition. So I am
good for you.
I'm very, very grateful for her tutelage and her spirit.
I love that. So delicious. Okay, so I'm always curious to know when I'm
Mhm.
talking to an author, what is your favorite part of the book? Like if you had to pick one aspect, what is one thing that you feel like you did really well, or maybe a story that you really deeply resonate to? Which part's your favorite?
I think the opening line,
Mm,
the very, very opening line, when you open my book, there is the spirit sigils, the map of the landscape, so you can actually see where these stories take place, and then the opening line itself. I'm very proud of this. It's a poetic announcement to the reader of the book. Do you want me to read it for
yeah,
our listeners?
absolutely. Go ahead.
This book is magic. It is marked with cunning knowledge. The words within are twisted and miraculous. The images represent figures and archetypes who never were and always have been. Blessed by the three mothers and seven holy siblings, this book will offer protection and refuge to all those who seek it, unless they be your enemy. Within lies the guile of the man in black, the endlessness of the Lady of Other, and the prismatic spectrum of the divine androgyne. This book is loving. This book is cruel. This book is full of life. This book is full of death. This book will charm. This book will curse. This book is marked with cunning knowledge. This book is magic.
So beautiful. It's so delicious. The whole book was delicious. And I just, oh, I wish I should have grabbed it. It's in the other room, but I was gonna, show it up on screen. But yeah, it was so good. I think you did such a wonderful job. For anybody watching this, I'm gonna have everything linked below, all of his socials, where you can find the book, all of that good stuff. But I guess just do you have any final thoughts that you'd want to share with everybody?
Um, Before we go, we should definitely discuss the chaos magic stuff because I feel
Oh,
like that would be
yes,
a really fun thing to get into if you're cool with
yes.
that.
Yes, no, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe I forgot to do that. Yeah, so the chaos magic stuff, I was really inspired by the sigil first of all, and I think the like you created somewhat of a, I don't know if I would consider it like a servitor or an egregore. This is just me as an outsider's perspective.
Please.
But okay, because this is me reading it and feeling the spirit of the book because the book is alive. It
Mhm.
feels alive. And there are some books that I read feels a little bit like dead energy. Yours feels very full of life. And that little character I was noticing on each page as it follows you through, I don't know if you intended this or not, but I was like, that's the face of the book and that is the spirit. And there is something going on there. I don't know if you created it as a servitor or if it's going to become an egregore over time, the more people that read the book. But I thought it was so intelligent. And that's, who knows? I don't even know if this is right, but do you want to talk about that? Does that resonate?
No, you're absolutely right. I had a lot of ideas when writing this book, and many of man, there's so many thoughts coming at me at once. It's hard to figure out which direction I want to go. The book is called Cunning Words because it is written for the most cunning. And I say that because only the most cunning are going to pick up on the littlest and finest details. I feel like you have just tapped into and said one of the least obvious but almost most important one that I felt that I put in this book. This book is absolutely alive. The sigils that are within are a spirit of the information that exists in something so much bigger. Um, I I love that you said that because it is a servitor. It is an egregore. It is these spirits can over time become egregores. They're archetypes now. They're spirits waiting to be worked with, waiting to be known, waiting to be read and seen and heard. Their voices are there. Um, and the more people that read them, of course, the more
Yeah.
people are going to know them.
Right.
And I think that's something that's really cool. And I like to think, and this is just me here, okay? Just you and me and all the
Sure.
thousands of people watching
And everyone else.
and everyone else. Like I would very much like to see something like this book. Mind you, I won't be around to it in a couple hundred years, but the way in which we think about, say, the 72 spirits from the Lesser Key of Solomon, the
Mm,
way that we think about the talismans from the Black Pullet, the way that we think about the Book of Charms from the Long Lost Friend, like the way that we think about these ancient or somewhat more recent texts, someone had to make up those first symbols. I guarantee you it was not King Solomon. King Solomon did not exist in the 15th, 16th, or 17th century. I promise you it was not King Solomon who came up with those planetary pentacles. It was attributed to him posthumously.
sure.
And one of the things that I think we all need to remember is everything was someone's UPG once. This
Yes.
book is my UPJ giving it to you uh, in a gift wrapped present, and I would love to see these characters, these spirits start taking on more of a life of their own. I would love to see more people tapping into and working with them and seeing them. I think that would make them very happy.
I think so too. I totally picked up on the spirits part of your book because I was like, wow, the more people that read this, the more powerful these characters become. Because that's the whole point, right? Is that we create
Hmm.
these characters and we want them to increase in power so that they can be more effective for the people that are using them. And oh, I just thought that was so cool. And also, I gain a lot of my inspiration just as a chaos magician in general from pop culture. I really like
Hmm.
incorporating various different things. So I loved that because especially you as a folkloric traditional witch to marry that with a little bit of chaos, with a little
Hmm.
bit of like Agrippa planetary magic. I was like, this is just everything I want in one book. So it was
And
so good.
it's I love that you brought up chaos magic because I didn't mention chaos magic almost except outside of the interview almost throughout this
Yeah.
whole book, specifically because I think a lot of people, and I think you understand this probably best, really misunderstand what chaos magic is. Chaos magic does not mean that anything goes. In fact,
Yes.
sometimes it can mean absolutely the opposite. It means that if you are focusing on a practice that involves around getting results from belief, you may have to switch from one belief to another, but you also may have to understand I cannot veer from this collection of belief because a part of it no longer resonates with me when this is what I'm working with. It's
Hmm.
not about what resonates with you. What's really interesting though is with chaos magic, there's a whole nother aspect of it where, and I think we might get into some silliness here, but like I know people who have used the Sailor Scouts as a connection to it's planetary spirits.
Hell yeah.
There are people who I'm like there are people who have who have talked about using like Pokemon as a type of spirit collective that you could call upon for different types of existences.
Mhm.
When it comes to narrative and story informing a practice, I don't see how the spirits in my book are truly any different than, say, um, the deities of Mount Olympus, maybe the witches and Grimm's fairy tales. They
Right.
all are characters, they're spirits, they're larger than life energies that are told to us in the form of a story that we
Hmm.
can glean, we can understand. Okay, so this story tells us that this person is all about love, sex, lust, art, creation. This story tells us that this person is all about war, anger, competition. That can change from person to person, story to story, culture to culture. But when I wrote this book, I knew I was tapping into an aspect of chaos magic because I was creating something new.
Hmm.
It may have been inspired by something old, but I was creating something new, and it is creating its own world building, its own cosmology. And so it is a new cosmology that as a chaos magician, you could switch from one set of belief to this one and use this one no different than you might work with, say, a Celtic cosmology, a Hellenistic cosmology,
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
Yeah, I am so excited. I haven't used any of your characters yet because I just finished reading it like last week. And there's been no time for rituals. But yeah, I mean, I've even used spells from Harry Potter. I mean, I am inspired by anything and everything, all
Hmm.
things pop culture, and inspired by things that are also non-pop culture. But what I like about your character specifically is that, okay, sometimes with chaos magic, it can feel a little I don't even know the right word to use. I don't know the right word to use. It just doesn't feel old enough. I don't know
Hmm.
how to explain. Sometimes when you're doing all this crazy stuff with pop culture,
It
it
feels less
feels,
legitimate.
yeah, it feels a little silly sometimes, which is actually
Hmm.
good for your ego. It's good to challenge your ego in this way.
It
Anyways,
is.
but
I have like those saint candles that have like Jonathan Van Ness, Moira,
me too.
from Schitt's Creek, and then like Jason Momoa from Aquaman. Like these are saint candles that have these celebrities' heads on them. And you know
Yes.
what? When I want that absolutely delusional self-confidence, I might light that Moira candle just for a few minutes before I leave the house.
I have the same exact Moira candle, the same
You
exact
get
one.
it.
Yeah, I do. So, anyways, and I have a Wednesday Addams one too. But yeah, and so it's fun to challenge your ego in that way and to do spell work in that way. But there is this. Sometimes I just want the old stuff. I want the ancient stuff
Hmm.
that feels a little bit more raw. And it's funny because your book, although you are creating these brand new characters and this new, this new system or this new world building, it feels old. And that's what I appreciate about it, is that I can use these characters and it feels like I'm drawing upon, because I know you were inspired by a lot older books, but it feels like I'm drawing upon something more ancient, and it gives it a little bit more oomph. It just feels more legitimate, I guess, which is probably not the right word to use. But I just wanted to say thank you for creating characters that make me feel not silly when using them. So,
Yes, you won't find any Pokemon in my book.
right, right. I mean, Pokemon's very valid, but still.
Totally valid. Not for me. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. Well, thank you so much, Marshall, for coming on the channel. I really appreciate you being here. I think everybody just adores you so much. You're such a sweetheart. And like, I mean, we could all listen to you talk forever. So I appreciate you being here. Oh, did you already plug your stuff? Yes, you did at the beginning of this
I
video.
did, yes.
Okay, and I'll have all your stuff linked below. So anyways, thank you for being here, and thank you for everyone watching. I will see you all in a video soon. Bye, everyone.